Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content. We did do a live stream, or Chris did a live stream regarding the trade deadline. So please go and check that out under our live section under our channel. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so now the trade deadline has officially been passed for a few days. And, I guess we can kind of take a look at some of the, new deadline acquisitions. Now, to be fair, as of this point, we are recording on Saturday. So as of this point, there are a number of players that have not quite yet played in their first games, but we have some that played, right? We can go over the Dallas Mavericks, right, with Anthony Davis in his debut for the Dallas Mavericks, right? He played on Saturday afternoon. And in his first game, 26 points, 16 rebounds, 7 assists, 3 blocks, 2 of 2 from 3, 10 of 18 from the field. In 30 minutes, he did get hurt in the second half. Now, they say that it's not, he says it's not a serious injury and that he may have re-aggravated, his, I guess, abdomen. I think he had a groin issue too, sort of. He may have re-aggravated that, that he was dealing with earlier. Right, so hopefully that's not an injury that keeps him out long term. They were still able to get the win over the Houston Rockets, who have just kind of been in a free fall mode, right? Because they've had some injuries to guys like Fred VanVleet. But he looked really good, and I think this is kind of like when we talk about the thought process of trading for a guy like Anthony Davis. This is where it's kind of funny, right? Because now you have a lot of people, right, who viewed Anthony Davis in one fashion, and now that he's a Maverick, now they're viewing him in another fashion where they're like, oh, wow, he's actually like really, really good. And like that's why the Mavs wanted to trade for him. And you can see in the minutes he played, they were huge. They were physical. He could play the 4 or the 5, right? Playing next to a guy like a Daniel Gafford. There was a ton of defense. The Rockets could not score at different points. It's just obviously then also we saw the negative aspect, right, where he ends up getting hurt, although he's been healthy as a Laker for the last couple of seasons anyways. But it's kind of wild, right? Because at the same time, you had the fans outside of the arena, right, who have just been not very happy, right, about this situation, of course. But then he showed out and balled out in the arena, and everybody was cool with it. And I think obviously, like, it's still a shock that it happened for a lot of those fans because Luka's their guy. But you can see the framework of why, you can see the vision of why this team can still be really, really good and still make the playoffs and, challenge for the playoffs. It's just obviously now one of the other issues you got is against certain type of matchups. Kyrie Irving, now he's the primary offensive playmaker, and he kind of struggled in this game where he was 4 for 15, but you still got some good possessions from Clay. He got to the basket multiple times, didn't even really hurt them from 3. Dante Exum came back, right? He's kind of been back, and he's kind of provided them some additional playmaking defense. Max Christie off the bench with 23 and 2. This is a guy, again, as a Laker fan, I was a big fan of his. So you can see the depth. You can see the defense. It's just a question of offensively come playoff time. How is that going to look? And then, obviously, can these guys stay healthy? Because PJ Washington also got hurt in this game, right? So they were still able to win because the Rockets just unfortunately have just not been very good recently. They've lost 6 in a row, and they've now dropped to the 5th spot in the Western Conference because the Lakers have been on a tear, and they got an improbable win against the Pacers without, without both LeBron and Luka, right? So when you look at the Mavs, you can see the vision of why they made the deal. It's just still kind of surreal that it's happening, and he played great. And so now he's going to be a featured part. They're one of their go-to guys offensively. It just stinks that he got hurt, but they say it's not serious. So as long as he's not missing too much time, they'll be fine. It's just a matter of again, the defense is going to carry that team, which they were already good defensively before they got AD. It's just now they're even better because now your best player is a defensive guy.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think this was kind of like the ideal debut for him because I think, you're going up against a solid offensive big, in Şengün, but at the same time, Anthony Davis not necessarily erased him, but there were times when, you know, he was on him and he couldn't really do much. That's what Anthony Davis brings on the defensive end. And we've all known this for years. It's just, funny and interesting to see him in a fresh and new environment. And I think that's the cool part is it is somewhat refreshing to see Anthony Davis elsewhere where he is kind of the true number one option. and also is still the defensive anchor, but is complemented by some pretty solid guys, and I think it kind of goes back to the championship version of AD where, you do have big men around him. And I think that's kind of what the Lakers have been missing in previous years. But regardless, that's neither really here nor there because we're kind of looking at this Mavs team. And like you said, you know, he's a force. And I think everybody's known that. Like Laker fans have known that. Obviously, they're going to
Yeah.
give him crap when he plays like crap,
Mhm.
just like, any other player. But, when he's on, he's on. And like you said,
Yeah.
the vision is there. And I think that's what everybody said when the trade initially happened. Yeah, the vision can be there with any, top 15 guy, but you just don't normally give up a top 5 guy, top 3 guy for that player. So, it should be interesting. I think it's going to be a fun ride. I was, you know, kind of pleasantly surprised at how the Mavs fans, in the building embraced AD. And,
Mhm.
when he made plays, they were kind of yelling. So shout out to the Mavericks fans who are thugging it out and supporting AD because it's not his fault that he's there. But it seems like he's embracing the moment as well. And that's good because it doesn't seem like he's unhappy or not being a
Right.
good soldier. Like it seems like he's
Looks
kind of
pretty.
embracing. Yeah, he seems like he's
Yeah.
embracing this change of scenery. And sometimes it's all a player needs. But yeah, I think there will be some potential struggles with some other players, specifically Kyrie, because I think we know, him being the primary playmaker isn't the best thing because we know that he can pass and we know what he can do. But at the same time, when he has to make a lot of crazy decisions in terms of playmaking and, facilitating, I think that's where you might see some struggles.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, hopefully he can, hopefully the injury is not too serious and he'll be able to, come back relatively soon. Because again, like they're gonna need him, because again, we talked about it after the trade deadline, right? Where all these teams in the West, especially the lower half, are bunched up, right? Where once you get to that 6, to 11 spot, they're all only a few losses with, away from each other, right? So if you're the Mavs, they're 8 right now because they've been able to win, they won back-to-back games and they're just kind of hanging on by a thread. But if AD can stay healthy, they can probably stay afloat and, be relatively fine
Yeah.
in the standings, right? Where, you feel better about them than maybe some of the other teams that are below them because they have less catching up to do because they're already there.
Right. Right.
So yeah, then you look around. I guess we can also just briefly right mention, there was one where it wasn't a trade, but it was like the return of a guy coming back from injury. That was Chet Holmgren. He came back and he played. Didn't play a ton. Obviously, he's been out for so long with that fracture, right? And he came back and he played what, like 20 minutes. Didn't really do much in terms of scoring, but he did have 4 blocks, 2 steals, 5 rebounds, and he started with Isaiah Hartenstein. So that seems like that's what's going to be the front court combination is those two guys with SGA, and then presumably Lou Dort and Jalen Williams, right? And that's kind of the lineup that I assumed that they were going to have. Maybe it changes depending on the matchup, but again, now you've turned Chet Holmgren once he's healthy into a roamer helper type defensive guy, and then you have Hartenstein who can battle the big physical centers, and he can still fit fine in a 5-out lineup, even though he's not a shooting threat because of the playmaking ability. So you can kind of see now the vision for that.
Yeah, it's similar to what Cleveland, has with Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. So that's pretty sweet, that you do have, Chet Holmgren who can be a mobile, like you said, roamer and shot blocker and stuff like that. And I think we all know what he can be defensively. And I think, as time goes on and as he ramps back up, he'll be the same Chet, if not better. So on the
Mm-hmm.
offensive end. But yeah, being
Yeah.
physical, I think, with both of their big men is going to be a huge X factor for them going into the playoffs because that's something that, they'd been missing. And, having both those guys healthy and, in the starting lineup together, I think is most definitely ideal for them.
Yeah. And then Jimmy Butler, he made his debut with the Golden State Warriors. Obviously, the game is actually going on as we're recording it right now, right in the first half, or through the first 3 quarters, essentially. Right, he's got 10 points, 3 assists, a steal. You can see obviously like with the parts where it's nice because he can act as a secondary playmaker, and that kind of helps set up some of these other guys like Buddy Hield. Right, he can get some high quality shots if he can knock them down. Right, obviously it takes a lot of pressure off of Steph, so now he's not really the only guy that's a creator. The only concern now is you're just kind of worried about the bench depth because now, you just kind of have mostly guys that aren't really necessarily offensive players. But in fairness, Jonathan Kaminga will eventually come back. By the time he comes back, right, that will kind of probably shore up, some of the scoring concerns that you have where now you can stagger guys. They say reportedly he's supposed to be in the starting lineup once he comes back. So that suggests that you're going to have a lineup where you're going to have Steph, supposedly Pods, we'll see, and then Butler, Kaminga, and Draymond. I don't know if that's what it's going to finally be because, of course, it could change. But if that is the starting five, I mean, that's a solid starting five. It's very small. But at the very least, you can see, Butler, especially once he gets his legs back under him, right? You'll be able to kind of see even more of, why they did what they did. And of course, yeah, I mean, it's still going to be a lot of work just because of where they are in the standings. But again, if you're the Warriors, you kind of had to do it just from the perspective of, he was the best available guy you could realistically get because they could have gotten Durant. They had the deal in place, but he didn't want to go there. So then you had to pivot to Butler. I think you still would have wanted Durant, even though you would have probably had to have given up more guys. Just obviously Durant's just a better player, but I don't think Butler is necessarily like a bad plan B or anything. It's just a matter of can they win enough games to get into that play-in spot because they're going to have to probably win about 60% of their games, if not 2/3 or so, to get to that 45, 46, 47 win total that you're probably going to need in order to stay in the play-in race because they're still 11th right now, which
Right.
of course could always change.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one to gauge because, like you said, the game is going on right now. But I am kind of looking at it from a fit perspective. That's the main thing. Like you said, he takes pressure off of Steph, and I think that's the kind of the most important thing because you do want to extend his career,
Yeah.
and also extend the championship window by doing so. Those two things coincide. But as long as he kind of provides, like I said, that relief of pressure from Steph, I think they'll be okay. Because and I don't really take his stats in this game into
Right.
account a whole lot because he's been away from consistent ball
Yeah.
for so long.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
one game.
exactly. So I expect and hope for them to be better, but like I said, when the move was initially made, I'm kind of like averaging it out because it comes from a place of desperation, and I'm just not a fan of those kinds of moves. But regardless, it still was the best thing that they could have possibly done. That
Mhm.
was realistic and was an actual possibility. So
Mhm.
I'm glad that he's suited up this quickly. That's a good sign because some guys, like you said, haven't played. So
Yeah. Kyle Kuzma also made his debut for the Milwaukee Bucks, right? Now in this game, he came off the bench. Giannis did not play, so that does change some things. But they played the Atlanta Hawks. They ended up losing 110 to 115. Right, Kuzma in his debut, 12.7 rebounds, 4 of 13 from the field, but he did shoot 3 of 8 from 3. Minus 15 in his minutes. You can kind of see in some areas, right? Again, the elements of where he can help the team is just a matter of did the Bucks realistically do enough to be able to move themselves into a better spot than they were? And I think it's kind of hard to say yes. Again, we got to see what it looks like when Giannis comes back. But again, standings wise, they're kind of fleeting because now they're fifth in the Eastern Conference. They're still close, right? The Pacers just lost, to the shorthanded Lakers, right? So they're only like a game and a half behind them. But, it's going to be much harder at this point for them to find a way to be able to get much higher than 4. I mean, they're 4-6 in their last 10, right? I mean, I know there've been some games where Giannis has sat, so that obviously makes it tougher. So again, this was a deal that I think we were kind of mixed on anyways. Like we understood it from the perspective of Middleton seemingly might not have been able to give you much. It's just the question is, can you take what Kuzma was doing in Washington? How much of that is just not really trying because he's on a horrible team? Can you take that and turn that into a more productive player? And I think the answer can be yes, somewhere in the middle. But is it enough to turn their season around? That's where I'm just not very high on that. And that's not really just because of Kuzma. It's just they needed to do more than that, anyways.
yeah, it's more of a total roster construction issue, I think. More so than just pinning it on Kuzma, but you know, uh, it's kind of a run of the mill Kyle Kuzma game. Me being a Wizards fan, I've seen this story before. Um, he'll have games like this, but then, sometimes he'll have another game where, he's solid, he's efficient, he's doing all the right things. But, that's kind of who he's always been. When you do ask him to kind of increase his volume of what he's, supposed to be doing. And, that's the tough part because the inconsistency, I think, goes up when the volume goes up. So I am hoping that they do kind of not necessarily like limit him and like make him a
Mhm.
role player, but I hope that he finds a way that they can find a way for him to be a good complement to Giannis and Dame. Because I think if he can, at the very least, do that, be a somewhat good defender and a playmaker, and also, spot up and hit shots, I think it'll be a good fit. And, I just want him to be able to give more than what Middleton was able to, because Middleton wasn't really able to give you a whole lot. So
Yeah. Um, just kind of as a shout out, just because the team has been playing so well, the Portland Trailblazers, after, having a stretch where they looked really awful. And, it was kind of weird because there were nights where, like, you could kind of see, if you kind of squint, moments where they'd look really good. They've been consistently great for the last few weeks, where they're 9-1 in their last 10. They've won 6 in a row. And all of a sudden, the team that, looked kind of rough at different points now can't seemingly find ways to lose. Now you're getting great production from a lot of guys. Tamani Kamara, right? The Suns' former, pick that they had, that they dealt in the Bradley Beal, I guess DeAndre Ayton move or whatever. Um, you also have Scoot Henderson now coming off the bench, and he's been playing some really good basketball as of late, right? Where he looks a lot more, like he looks a lot closer to the player you were hoping to see, right, from his rookie year. But, it's fine that it's happening in his second year. Looks a lot more comfortable with the ball, looks a lot more comfortable making decisions. You got Robert Williams, Donovan Clingan. I mean, again, they've been one of the best defensive teams during this stretch. And it's just kind of funny where now they're going to try to challenge, I guess, for a play-in spot. I'm not sure if they can. I mean, they're really close. I mean, they're a few games back, but it's just tough because there's so many teams that are going to be competing. And the Spurs, right, 3-7 in their last 10. They lost 2 games in just brutal fashion, right? One where they lose both games, they lose basically to go-ahead shots, right? One from Miles Bridges where, they just lose track of him and he hits a corner three. Then
great
another
pass by
go-ahead.
LaMelo too.
Yeah, exactly. Great pass by LaMelo. And then, another game where they lose what to the Orlando Magic, right? Again, right at the end of the game, in the last possession, right, where it's basically what Paolo fadeaway, right, basically for the win, and it's tough, right? Because I mean, again, if that's a team that's going to try to challenge for that play-in spot, that can't happen, right? Because if they're trying to chase a team like the Golden State Warriors, that's probably not going to be enough because, again, that team's probably just going to be able to win more games, if they can get the production they're getting, from these guys right now. And, of course, it's still a work in progress, but it's just weird because it seems like the Spurs just can't defend anymore consistently. And I'm not really sure what happened, but just kind of a story of two different situations because the Blazers now all of a sudden are the hot team, after really struggling. And the Spurs, even post Fox trade, have continued to be a little bit tough. Maybe they make an adjustment and don't start Chris Paul. Not that that's like the complete reason, but it's just tough. But for the Blazers, obviously, it's a great story.
Yeah, for the Blazers, it's really interesting, and I think the fact that they didn't really do anything at all with the deadline, except for I believe they signed City Sissoko off of like the waiver or whatever, but not that he's gonna play a whole lot, if at all. But yeah, overall, I mean, I think you have a lot of good core pieces that teams would definitely want, and the young guys are the ones that I'm really impressed with. Like you said, Scoot coming off the bench is pretty sweet. Granted, I would like him to be more of a starting caliber point guard for real, but at the end of the
Mhm.
day, this is going to help his career development, and hopefully, he'll get to that generational point. But
Mhm.
Shaden Sharp, solid, but I don't know. Regardless, though, I mean, the squad is interesting. It's weird. It's weird
Yeah.
at the end of the day, but I think it's a weird mesh of guys that it's the kind of I don't know how to it's just a weird team, but they just find a way to win. And I think they have the length, they have, you know, some guys on here that just gel well together. It's interesting. The chemistry is there on the defensive end. They're pretty solid. I think having a guy like Avdia on the team is pretty good as well because he's putting up similar numbers that he did in Washington, but he can do stuff with the ball, and he's also a pretty solid defender as well. So and they've got big man depth, so I guess there is a pathway for them to somewhat get into the play-in, but with the Spurs, it's really rough, because I think the debut of De'Aaron Fox was pretty solid. I enjoyed that.
Right.
I thought that was a good sign, but then that Charlotte game was just crushing, man. And you had some pretty good performances from a lot of their guys, like Stephon Castle. I thought he played pretty well. Vassell, Fox, obviously, and just for you pretty much lost because Fox couldn't get the shot off in time. That really sucks. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't even know what to say about the Orlando one. That you just can't really lose games like that, and like you said, that might be the reason why they don't get into the play-in.
Hmm. Yeah. And again, like that's the thing, like with them is like for that Fox deal. I mean, this also is for the future too, right? Because again, like you're gonna eventually these young guys, they'll either get better, they'll move on from some of them, right? Because you are getting some, I think, disappointing-ish returns at times from guys like Devin Vassell, and Keldon John. Not that they're gonna, not that they're gonna have to be traded, but obviously that's something that they're gonna have to figure out. But yeah, from a Blazers perspective, great, great, great job. It's just a matter of again, can they find ways to, maybe in the offseason, maybe move some of those guys because like I think at some point you're gonna have to probably kind of choose between like a Jeremy Grant, and someone else, right? And it's not, and again, he's not had a great season, but we already knew he wasn't gonna get dealt anyways because the contract is just rough. He's not played that well, so he's probably not really worth it to trade for at this point. They may just be stuck with him. I don't know, but at least from the Blazers' perspective, they're winning. It's just, do they really need to win too much at this point? Just because now, their pick situation is going to be a little bit different, and it doesn't really seem. I don't know because at times it feels like they're not further along, but they are further along than some of these other teams. It's
Yeah, for
just
sure.
I'm still not sure. Even with Scoot playing better, I'm still not sure at we've seen it at the point yet where he can be like your franchise point guard. So that's where like
Yeah.
you're probably still gonna have to bank on next draft getting another guy. It's just gonna probably be tougher if their standing is better. But you could just luck out and get a high pick anyways. That's what happened with the Hawks. Just
Right.
obviously it's a different type of draft. Yeah. And then after that, we do have a couple of buyout guys, right? We did have, Ben Simmons getting bought out. He's going to join the Clippers. We'll see what he does with the Clippers, right? He's kind of been in and out of the lineup this season for the Brooklyn Nets. And, when he plays, there are moments where you can kind of see something there. But then there's also just other moments where, he's still clearly not the same guy. Can he be healthy? The Clippers have been kind of fleeting for a little bit, but at least they did make some moves at the deadline, right? Because they're bringing in Ben Simmons, they're going to bring in Bogdanovich, who has not played well this season, but maybe they can get something out of those two guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. You're taking a flyer on a guy. It's a guy who brings some defensive tenacity, which you somewhat need. So, I think the playmaking aspect, I'm curious, how it works offensively because, like you said, he doesn't really give you a ton on that end of the floor. But I think as long as he limits the turnovers, plays smart basketball and gives you something on the defensive end, I don't really have a problem with it. Why not take a chance on a guy?
Yeah. And then Alex Len, he got bought out. He's going to join the Pacers. Again, he hadn't done really much this season anyways. He hadn't really been that significant of a player in a little bit anyways. I guess he had some moments for the Kings. But again, for a team that needs some big man depth, I guess, because it's basically Miles Turner and Thomas Bryant. That's it. It's just another tall guy that I guess probably is going to be the third string center, right? I doubt he,
Yeah,
plays too much of a role.
yeah, but like you said, third string, but at the end of the day, you still do need that security and safety net of depth because their center room was very thin because I think multiple guys were injured. So having him on the team and roster is a good thing, I think. And yeah, buyout. So it's not like
Yeah,
you're going over the moon for Alex Len. So
right. Next up, not long before we got on here, we had a trade that actually was rescinded. Right, by the time you see this episode, you'll already know what we're talking about, right? But the Lakers deal, the deal between the Lakers and Hornets, right, with Mark Williams going to the Lakers, all right, for Dalton Connect, Cam Reddish, 2031 first and a pick swap, or 2030 swap, right? That deal has been rescinded, right? So, and essentially, it seems like what happened was Mark Williams, it was quote unquote due to failure to satisfy a condition of the trade. We got bits and pieces of what happened coming out afterwards, and it seems like Mark Williams did not pass his physical, and the Lakers had the option to either, I guess, keep the deal going or rescind it. They decided to rescind it, so they must have seen something that must have been pretty bad from a health perspective from him. But obviously now the deadline's over, so you can't now all of a sudden just pivot to another deal. You're stuck, right? So now that means that the guy that you thought you were going to bring in, you don't have anymore, right? So now you're back to having probably Jackson Hayes as your starting center, and then after that, two-way guys, right? Because now they don't even have an open roster spot because they sent out two guys to bring in one. So they would still have to waive somebody. Is it Reddish, who doesn't really play anymore? Is it Wood, who can't even play anymore because he's hurt? And now, again, your ceiling is, I think, a lot lower now because now you don't really have a realistic, viable option as a starting center. Not that Hayes is like the worst player you'll ever see. It's just, compared to a lot of other teams starting centers, it's just not ideal. It's just not what you would want. They have been able to find ways to play well with smaller lineups. With the return of Jared Vanderbilt, you got Dorian Finney-Smith. So that may just be, I guess, what they kind of turn to. But obviously it hurts because you can't change it and go get someone else. Now you're kind of stuck. Now you kind of have to wait until the offseason to probably use, those assets like your pick, maybe Dalton Connect. And that means now guys are coming back to locker rooms, right, where they were basically getting traded. So didn't really expect it, but obviously this was always, I guess, a concern about trading for a guy like a Mark Williams because he's got an injury history where he's missed a lot of time with a number of issues, including his feet and his back. And so now it's a rough spot to be in. Obviously, you still got Luka, right? So obviously that's a bonus. It's just now you don't really have a great option at the 5 spot, and you either have to kind of hope and pray somebody gets bought out, which who's really at this point going to get bought out in the center market that you'd want over Jackson Hayes? Probably not really anybody. Or you just kind of have to go back to what they were doing before.
Yeah, I think this sucks for both sides because for Charlotte, it's just bad business. It doesn't reflect good, I think, on your organization if you're letting things slip through the cracks like that.
Mhm.
And then the Lakers is just devastating because I think that like we said in the last episode, it was the first Luca move, that was really centered around him. And it was a guy that they clearly wanted, and they thought that they could pair with Luca. And I think in theory, yeah, it works amazingly. But unfortunately, he's not going to be a Laker. And I think that really sucks because now, like you said, Jackson Hayes is your guy. And, come playoff time, how does that look? Probably not too good. Um,
Mhm.
and, I think the roster is going to have to undergo even some serious changes in the
Right.
offseason, if you want to legitimately contend with Luka Doncic on your team because, this team is just not really built around Luka at the moment. And I feel like the Mark Williams move would have just accelerated that so much faster, and I think they would have looked so much better. But now I don't know, that might be like a first round exit kind of team. I don't know, that's kind of how I'm feeling in terms of the
Yeah.
quality of the center position. But yeah, overall, just bad vibes about the whole thing.
Yeah, and also it makes the buyout market harder because it puts them much closer to the second apron.
Right.
And you don't have an open roster spot. So you'd still have to cut somebody, but you can't cut anybody and save money. You got to kind of eat the contract. So
Yeah.
that makes it a
Yikes.
lot tougher. So, and again, who's out there right now, right? Who's out there as a buyout guy, that we know of? I mean, I guess you have about 3 weeks or so. Well, I think, yeah, you have about 3 weeks or something like that because I think March 1st is the last day that somebody can get bought out and join a playoff roster. But again, who's getting bought out at that center spot that we're looking at, right? That we're kind of assuming like you can go in there. And then, like I said, who is that's better than Jackson Hayes? Not really anybody. So that's a tough spot to be in. And, and again, that's the tough part about some of these type of deals, especially when it's so late, because now, you know, it's getting rescinded because it was funny because before the Indiana game, right, he was listed as questionable, not due to an injury, but due to the trade pending. But it seemed like the trade was official, right? Because like they had the thing from both social media sites where they're introducing like the players or whatever with their pictures. But now that it's rescinded, right? Now that's clearly, like I said, not going to be the case. And again, like you said, him failing his physical, and I guess not knowing about it, but that's also the tough part of trying to acquire those type of guys. That's why,
Right.
and then you could make the case, all right, that's probably why Charlotte did that deal, right? Because they probably had a feeling that, like, we'll be okay because this guy's probably not going to, make it through whatever injuries or whatever issues he's got, right? So, like you said, it kind of just looks bad from both sides because then from the Lakers' perspective, maybe you didn't do enough of your homework and now you can't do anything else because the
Yep.
deadline's over, right? If
Yep.
this and the deal happened the night before, so it wasn't. But at the same time, you can't do the physical until the guys arrive, right? And I don't necessarily know if there was a way to have done the trade earlier. So that's kind of the tough part about a situation like that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, in terms of news rumors, I mean, again, there's not really anything else, to discuss at this point, right? Because obviously, after this, it's kind of just fallout from, the trade deadline. Bones Highland, he's getting waived. Maybe he goes to a team. Who knows? I mean, he's kind of been a guy that's kind of fallen off, since his days in Denver, right? Where it just seemed like, it seemed like he had promise. Then it seemed like he had some problems getting along with guys in Denver. And now he's just kind of at a point where maybe a team takes a flyer on him, but
Hmm.
probably not like a contender team, if I had to guess. So
Yeah.
then from ESPN, funny enough, two teams had interest in Bradley Beal, the Hawks and his former team, the Washington Wizards.
Yeah.
Right? So kind of interesting where that came from. But I guess the problem is that if you're the Suns, what could you have dealt him? What could you have gotten back from either of those teams? Possibly. That's kind of the part where I do kind of wonder.
Yeah, I did hear that rumor, and it's funny because I was in a Twitter space, with some fellow Wizards fans, and people weren't opposed to it. We were like, not necessarily like bringing back for the vibes, but more so bringing back for the horrible contract and stuff
Mhm.
of that nature. But yeah, the discussion really did revolve around what the heck would we have given up to acquire a guy like Bradley Beal. And yeah, it's interesting because I'm sure that he would not have waived his trade clause to come back to DC anyway. So
Yeah.
um that's the hilarious part. But it is interesting that there was somewhat of a small market for Bradley Beal because it seemed like everywhere that they were trying to ship him out
Hmm.
didn't really want him. I think we didn't hear anything
Yeah.
concrete from the Bucks. We heard Miami just flat out said no, but
Hmm.
the fact that he did have suitors, I think, is interesting for maybe down the line or summer or something like that. But regardless, it was weird to hear the Wizards in that mix. But hey, I would have done it, for the bad contract.
We did have a comment that we'll read, before we get out of here. The comment is from Hip 360 Hop, right? Somebody who has commented before because they mentioned Tamani Kamara for most improved. This was way back earlier. I think this was like before the season started. But the comment they mentioned in the short, our most recent short said, "Need you guys to talk about my Blazers." Well, you're in luck because if you check out the short, that's our last short. That's our latest short. And we also had a segment in this episode where we talked about the Blazers.
Yeah, I think it is cool. Thank you for the comment, and we do appreciate that. We hope that you
Mm-hmm.
comment and like and subscribe more. But yeah, like if you want us to talk about your favorite team, please don't hesitate to comment that, and we will literally abide by that rule and talk about it. Like if you want us to talk about the Raptors, we'll talk about the Raptors.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, don't be afraid and don't hesitate to comment because we will listen or read it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, when you subscribe to us, right, and you leave comments about what we can do to either improve the channel or, just that you want to see, we'll try to do it to the best of our ability.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on, the debut of some of these guys. And there'll be more to come as well, right? Some now non-debuts of other guys, right? As we talked about. But either way, again, the NBA season continues to get crazier. Obviously, we'll have the All-Star break, right? And obviously we'll have that. Then after that, right, then you're going to start to probably see some teams really ramp up because that's when the playoff race is going to get a lot more serious. Continue to like, comment, and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the end of the video. We appreciate everybody for, again, helping us grow the channel. We'll see you in the next episode.